You're listening to the Podcast Detroit Network. Visit www.podcastdetroit.com for more information. The views and opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily represent those of the network, its advertisers, owners, or sponsors.
Hello there. So this is the inaugural episode, the first episode I've ever done, so bear with me with this. But so this is the Cultivating Health podcast, and I really appreciate everybody listening, whoever might be out there listening. So I'm going to do my best and get into this. Hope that it goes smooth for me and everybody listening. So first and foremost, my name is Justin Gephart, and I want to say a little bit about my background, my education, my experience, etc. So first and foremost, this podcast, it's called Cultivating Health. And the reason I wanted to go with Cultivating Health is because I feel like we're always trying to learn, get better, change the things we need to change to continue to get better, kind of a continuous improvement type approach to life in general. And in this case, given my background, given my experience, I wanted to talk about health, get some knowledge out there, get some things off my chest, some things I wanted to talk about. So again, my name is Justin Gephart. I have my undergrad degree, my bachelor's degree from Eastern Michigan in physical education and health education. Then I earned my master's degree in public health from the Northwest Ohio Consortium for Public Health, but basically it's the University of Toledo. It's called that because they combine teachers and courses from both University of Toledo and Bowling Green State University. So I'm a huge health nerd, health and wellness nerd. I've had some experience in personal training. I've been a personal trainer in the past, so that's why I wanted to get some information out there. Why exactly am I doing this podcast? What are the goals? What am I hoping to accomplish with this? It's kind of couple reasons as to why, but first and foremost, hopefully whoever might give me the pleasure of listening to this might get some information, might get some knowledge, might get some education, and maybe motivate themselves to make some positive, beneficial health changes in their life. Increasing wellness in any way, shape, or form. If I have a part in that, I'll be happy. And secondly, I am hugely passionate about this, and being able to help people, being able to make an impact, gives me some fulfillment in my life. So hopefully, maybe somebody out there might hear this, maybe groups, maybe big companies, maybe researchers, what have you, and they might say, you know what, I like this guy. Maybe we can give him a chance. Maybe we might need some help, and ask me to get involved, because I want to be involved and I want to make sure that I can make an impact, because again, it's what I enjoy. So before I get into any type of content here, I do want to say that everything I'm going to talk about, I have read it, I have learned it. It's kind of my opinion, yet it's all based off of research. It's all based off of research studies, clinical trials, reading, and listening to things from and by experts in the field. So I will talk about a couple of different experts out there that I like to go to, but overwhelmingly I want to make sure that I get that out there. So it's not just my opinion, and I didn't make these things up, but I did learn these things, and I did find these things from legitimate sources. We're going to talk about some diet stuff, some exercise stuff, some supplement type stuff. And please, everybody's an individual. Everybody's different, and everybody requires different things. So generally, the topic matter that I'm going to discuss, generally it is good for everybody. But if you are going to partake in any type of diet, exercise, or supplemental regimen, please make sure that you speak with your primary care physician before partaking in that. The body is a very complex thing, first and foremost. So I'm going to try to keep this as general and as basic as possible, but I do want to make sure that I touch on some things that might be a little bit in depth. So please bear with me on that. But I very much encourage everybody to do their own research and find out as much as you can on your own based off the things that I say. So please feel free to do that. I'll remind you throughout my time here as well. And if at any time throughout this podcast, any episode that I might do now or in the future, if you'd like to contact me to ask me any questions or get a hold of me for any reason, I did just make a Gmail account. It's called Cultivating Health Podcast at gmail.com. So feel free to send me a message, and I would love the opportunity to speak with anybody who wants to ask some questions or talk, or, ask me to get involved in anything or everything, to be honest with you. So please feel free to reach out to me, and I'll remind you of that before the end of the show here. So with that being said, I also have to remind everybody that just because we get educated on a topic, or I'm throwing out some education, that doesn't necessarily indicate or mean behavior change. So I am aware that behavior change in and of itself is a topic for another day. It is a very complex topic, but education is certainly a portion of behavior change. So as long as we can get some knowledge out there, that is a great component to behavior change down the road. So I want to make sure I get that out there. And also, I feel like having the education background that I do, for example, so many people are told, okay, eat this because it's healthy. Your vegetables are healthy. Eat vegetables because they're healthy. But I feel like that is so vague that it doesn't really pique anybody's interest. Okay, I know it's healthy, but why is it healthy? What is it doing to me and my body that's making me healthy because of it? And that's kind of the idea and the approach, what got me going to, partake in this podcast, and hope that I can try to pinpoint a few things. Again, this is very basic and just a handful of things in the time that I have to talk about a few things and how they impact the body on an individual, personal basis. So I really, it's really kind of my goal in my field and my career to try to impact people on a personal level and how these things can really help them in their situation in their life. So I wanted to make sure that I told everybody that. So everything that, I guess, kind of the basis of my approach, my philosophy on health, is something that is called functional medicine, as opposed to conventional medicine. You can also, there's a lot of holistic type approaches as well too. So people are referred to as a holistic approach. It's kind of along the same lines, but so conventional medicine, and I think everybody's going to agree with me when I say this, and they're going to be, oh yeah, I think that makes sense, especially in everybody's personal experience. But right now, we go to the doctor usually because we have a symptom of some way, shape, or form. We go in there and we say, okay, doc, I have a headache, or I have high blood pressure, or whatever it might be. And in the 10 minutes or so that we, on average, doctors in America spend with their patients, and roughly that 10 minutes, the doctor says, okay, yep, you have your high blood pressure. Here's a medication to deal with your high blood pressure. So we go to the pharmacy, we get our prescription filled, and we start taking our medication to lower our blood pressure. But so that's the conventional medicine approach. We treat symptoms with drugs. The functional medicine approach, which is kind of gaining steam nowadays, is more of a find the cause of the symptom and treat the underlying cause of the symptom. So for example, let's say the headache or the high blood pressure or the obesity, what have you, is our symptom. Now, what is causing those symptoms? Maybe it's our diet. Maybe it's our lack of exercise. Or maybe it's, gut health. Maybe it's, a multitude of things that normally come back to diet and exercise. But nevertheless, if we can find the basic underlying cause of the symptoms that we're experiencing, we can treat that underlying cause, which in turn is going to treat that symptom, and hopefully, if not eradicate our underlying cause, minimize the impact significantly with the treatment that we might give from that functional medicine perspective. So again, it's kind of an approach to the way chronic diseases are treated in this day and age. There are significant amounts of chronic diseases. Chronic diseases, your cancers, your diabetes, your things that basically you have that you're never really going to completely get rid of. You can just minimize, or it's going to get so bad that it, there is no more fix to it. So the couple of experts that I'm going to refer to a lot, that I use a lot and I leaned heavily on for the information for this podcast are Rhonda Patrick and Chris Kresser. Rhonda Patrick she has her PhD in biomedical science, and she has her own website. It's called Found My Fitness, and it's a phenomenal website. Please get on there and learn about Rhonda. She has a spot on there where you can type in a topic and it will bring you all of the peer-reviewed journal articles, research articles that have been done on that topic. And it's very, very useful. The next person is Chris Kresser. He has his Kresser Institute out on the West Coast. He is a functional medicine pioneer, I guess you could say. He has a book out. It's called Unconventional Medicine. I just finished it. It's fantastic. I certainly recommend it. He has his podcast. He has his website. He has his blog. He's a very influential, very intelligent man. So those are the people that I've really kind of leaned on for the topic matter here. So first and foremost, the first topic that I want to start with is something called inflammation. And inflammation is kind of the basis of chronic disease in this day and age. And what is inflammation? Well, there's multiple types, a couple specific types really, I suppose. When we get a cut or we get a bruise, what happens, our immune system sends out all of these substances that are basically inflame that area that we get a cut or we get a bruise on. And that's good because usually it takes a few days, 5 days, 7 days or so, and that problem pretty much goes away. So that's good. That is needed. It is crucial, really, to fighting off those illnesses and heal injuries. But there's also a situation where we can have too much inflammation or inflammation in the wrong places, and that can be a bad thing. Okay, what causes that inflammation in all those bad places throughout our body? Something called chronic systemic low-level inflammation. And what happens is there are these substances called cytokines that are responsible for cell signaling. So our cells in our body, we have cells, we're made up of cells, really. So it can stimulate inflammation, or it can stimulate our cells to reduce inflammation. But the excessive chronic production of those inflammatory substances, they're called cytokines in this situation. They have something called pro-inflammatory cytokines, and they can contribute to inflammatory diseases. So, for example, if we have pretty much any time something is in our body that isn't supposed to be there, or our body doesn't need, and our body tries to rid itself of that substance, whatever it might be. It could be food, it could be pollution, it could be a sliver of some way, shape, or form. Our body is always trying to rid itself of what it doesn't need or was not supposed to be in it. And nowadays, with the pollution that we have going on, with the different foods that we have available to us on a regular basis, on an easy basis, easily accessible basis, these chronic diseases, the basis of these chronic diseases are this inflammation that we're experiencing that I'm talking about here. So the inflammation can be responsible for, again, a plethora of diseases, including rheumatoid arthritis, atherosclerosis, asthma, IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, depression, which we'll hopefully get to, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, psoriasis, lupus, multiple sclerosis, migraine headaches, which I kind of touched on, cancer, and diabetes, which we'll also kind of touch on those too, hopefully here in the not too distant future. But something that kind of goes hand in hand with inflammation is something called oxidative stress. And I think we're all probably somewhat aware of oxidative stress, whether or not we actually are, but indirectly we're probably aware in some way, shape, or form. And what oxidative stress is it occurs when excess oxygen radicals are produced in cells. So how do we get that? How do we get those excess oxygen cells that are excess oxygen radicals that are produced in our cells and floating around our body? Well, first of all, oxygen is supposed to be a good thing, right? Well, it is a good thing as long as we don't get too much of it. And a couple examples of getting too much oxygen. So when you cut open an apple, for example, and you have the white flesh of an apple, if you let it sit there for a while, that white flesh kind of turns brown, right? That is because of an overabundance of oxygen, I guess, mixing with the cells of that apple. Same thing happens with an avocado. When you open an avocado and you let it sit there for a while, that green kind of turns brown. Same thing happens to rust on your car. If your car gets rusty, it's because of an oversaturation of oxygen mixing with the chemicals and I guess contents of the metal. So oxygen can certainly, it's pivotal to life, but it can certainly be a hazard too. So if we do have too much of these oxygen radicals floating around and they're not taken care of by the normal internal antioxidants that we have in our cells, obviously we need to figure out a way to get ourselves some antioxidants to take care of those free radicals that are floating around. And I know probably, like I said, a lot of us are probably indirectly familiar with oxidative stress and the word antioxidants because we always talk about fruit and their antioxidant power. So I'm sure a lot of people have heard about that, heard about vitamin C and things of that nature. So again, we're kind of indirectly familiar with antioxidants and this oxidative stress, but wanted to touch on that. So what can happen because of oxidative stress or oxidative damage? Basically, it can turn, if it has an impact on healthy cells, if we're not getting rid of these free oxygen radicals that are floating around our cells, floating around our body, it can damage healthy cells. And it's interesting because damaged healthy cells can also be called mutated cells. And mutated cells, as we know, a long-term buildup of these unhealthy mutated cells is cancer. So granted, just because you don't eat fruit for a day or two doesn't mean you're going to develop cancer tomorrow, but basically we're trying to build our protection over time with eating the right foods and getting the right exercise and things of that nature to kind of build our defenses against cancer down the line. So I wanted to touch on oxidative stress because I think it's an interesting topic, and we'll talk more about fruit and antioxidants here in a little bit. But I wanted to mention that from the get-go. How exactly do you oxidative stress? Okay, it could result from multiple things. One of them happens to be the activation of the immune system, and like I kind of said a little bit ago with the inflammation idea is the activation of the immune system in and of itself is inflammation. So you have those invading microorganisms, which then cause unnecessary or an overabundance of those free oxygen radicals, which causes the oxidative stress. But so then the inflammation can cause the oxidative stress. So they're kind of linked, and more inflammation causes more oxidative stress, and oxidative stress causes more inflammation. So they're kind of paired together in a bad way because both of them are pretty unhealthy. But there are ways that we can protect ourselves against that. So I'm going to hopefully get into that here in a little bit too. But something else I wanted to mention is something called senescence, and senescent cells specifically. And what senescence is when cells stop dividing, but they don't die. So we have skin cells, we have hair cells, all our whole body is made up of cells, and they have a certain amount of divisions that they can make until they either die and get flushed out of the body, or they stop dividing and stay in the body and don't technically die. And that can cause issues because the buildup of senescent cells stimulates a continual call for immune cells, which leads to chronic inflammation, which ultimately causes tissue damage and that premature biological aging. And which I think is interesting because the idea here, again, is to keep those cells healthy. And what damages those cells are things like that oxidative stress and things like inflammation. So with the biological aging that I touched on, we don't, obviously, we don't want to get old. And the interesting thing about the buildup of those senescent cells, not flushing out those senescent cells and increase oxidative stress and increase inflammation, we can increase that biological aging, or if we protect ourselves against the inflammation, the oxidative stress, and clean out those senescent cells, it's a great way to minimize our biological aging. And I think we have all, actresses and actors and stuff, we know what their ages are, but yet we always say, man, they don't look their age. They look so good for their age. Well, most likely they're minimizing the damage done to their cells and their interior tissues, which is allowing them to keep their biological age low, keep them from aging biologically, slowing that aging process down. Another thing that I wanted to talk about real quick is something called apoptosis. And apoptosis, that is the death of cells in a normal, healthy way. And it is a controlled part of an organism's growth and development. So we all, it's not bad for cells to die. That's kind of how we, our look changes over time and we grow because our cells divide and then they die and then new cells form and we grow bigger, we go stronger, our look changes. And so that's totally healthy. But sometimes if they contain viruses or happen to have some sort of DNA damage due to the oxidative stress or the inflammation, things of that nature, how am I trying to say this? The inactivation of that programmed cell death can cause disease long term. It can cause the cancer long term. It can cause a whole litany of those chronic diseases that we spoke about earlier. And normally, under healthy, normal circumstances, apoptosis helps take care of those damaged cells and those sick cells or mutated cells. However, if we don't keep up to date with as far as getting all of our all the things that our body needs to keep it healthy, the buildup of the inflammation, the buildup of that oxidative stress is going to minimize the effectiveness of that apoptosis process. So again, we need to make sure that our lifestyle choices are the correct ones to keep us healthy. And those lifestyle choices, they can keep telomeres long and strong and keeping cells healthy, thus keeping apoptosis operating at a healthy rate. Now, I've mentioned telomeres, and we'll talk about those here in a second, but those are very interesting components of our body, of our cells, of our DNA. So I wanted to, before I move on from inflammation, I wanted to mention depression and how there is a significant link. This is kind of a topic in and of itself that we can talk about another day sometime. But depression and inflammation are linked, and a lot of studies, a lot of research has come out lately that links inflammation to depression in a causal manner, meaning inflammation can cause depression. So it's interesting how that has been found to be causal, because there is a huge amount of depression that happens in America, I guess, and probably the world over, but having that inflammation being found to be a cause, we can work as hard as we can to help minimize our inflammation, which should mean that we can minimize our depression symptoms if we are an individual who are suffering with depression. So I think it's really interesting, and that certainly provides an option and a way out as far as people with depression. I mean, it's probably not guaranteed, but it's certainly an option to try to better our lifestyle choices, which could then minimize our inflammation, which could then minimize our depression symptoms. So definitely recommend everybody going out there and researching that. The one interesting thing, there's a study I wanted to share with everybody, but it's people who had depression had a 46% higher rate, or however higher level of C-reactive protein, or CRP. And what that is, it's a substance in the blood that you can, get your blood drawn and get your blood tested. And the higher amounts of C-reactive protein, which happens to be a biomarker for inflammation in the blood, 46%, people who had depression had 46% higher levels of that C-reactive protein in their blood compared to people who weren't depressed. So that's a pretty significant number. So I wanted to share that with everybody. And again, feel free to go out there and research that. So lastly, before we move on, I wanted to touch on sugar and refined carbohydrates. Those also are topics in and of themselves. We could spend an hour on alone with just those, but sugar and refined carbohydrates are one of, if not the largest contributor diet-wise to inflammation. The body's not a fan, and the body tries to rid itself of that sugar and those refined carbohydrates. So one of the reasons that sugar is such a, bad thing, there's many reasons, but one of them is the sugar's linked to insulin resistance, which leads to excess body weight, body fat, which in turn can lead to inflammation, which then leads to that chronic disease that we've kind of spoke about. So it's again, there are many avenues that we can pursue there as far as discussing sugar and its negative impact on the body, refined carbohydrates and their negative impact on the body. But that's one that I think is very important. And insulin, again, it's kind of it's a major contributor. The insulin resistance is a major contributor to diabetes. And if we take in glucose, insulin is then released by the liver, I believe. And that kind of unlocks the glucose, so we are able to use that as fuel. But if we're having insulin resistance, the insulin and the glucose are not able to link up and unlock to provide energy to our cells, and things go haphazard from there. So again, we can talk about that another time, but I definitely, push everybody to go ahead and research that, because it's a very, very interesting topic. Next thing I want to talk about, something called telomeres. I kind of mentioned those a little bit ago, but these are very, very interesting pieces of biology. And what a telomere is, it's the caps on the end of your chromosomes. And a chromosome is the thread-like structure found in the nucleus of most living cells, and they carry genetic information in the form of genes. So they carry your genes in your telomeres or in the chromosomes, and telomeres are on the tips of your chromosomes. And what happens with those telomeres is they protect your DNA from damage. So, for example, you can kind of think of them as those little plastic things on the tips of your shoelaces, and to keep your shoelaces from fraying. It's kind of the same idea with these telomeres in your chromosomes. Keeps the kind of chromosomes from fraying, because every time a cell divides, that chromosome, that telomere, is kind of shaved off a little bit. And it's interesting because that's a significant indicator. It is a huge player, and it's kind of a go-to, what scientists use to determine biological aging. We can talk about that here in a second. Like I said, so they get shorter with every cell division until nothing is left, and then your cells die or undergo that permanent arrest, which was that senescent cells that I spoke about a minute ago. Some of our cells, which I think this is really interesting, they have a special enzyme called telomerase, and that allows our telomeres to be rebuilt. So after all of our cells divide, if we maintain the proper lifestyle and a healthy lifestyle, some of those cells can actually rebuild those telomeres, which is going to keep those cells strong and healthy and minimize, again, that biological aging, which, again, is going to keep us healthy into the future as long as possible. Like I said, it has been used. Telomere length has been used as a biological marker of age, and the younger you are, the longer your telomere length is. So as babies, we have super long telomeres. As old people, we probably have much shorter telomeres. But if we're living into 100 years or so, 100 years old or so, it's probably because we've, kept those telomeres healthy, kept them nice and long, lived a healthy lifestyle, and we're super agers, as they say. And there are certain factors, as you would assume, that can hurry up telomere shortening, and then there are certain things that can slow down those telomere shortenings. And a couple of examples of what can quicken that shortening and basically increase our biological age and minimize the lifespan of our cells, so to speak, is chronic stress, which I think probably most of us deal with, which is difficult. Smoking, and I think everybody at this point in time knows that smoking is very unhealthy for us. Inflammation, which we've talked about. Obesity, which we've kind of, mentioned up to this point. And then oxidative stress, which we've talked about that as well. What are some things that can extend that telomere life? vitamin D sufficiency, which we'll talk about here in a second, omega-3 sufficiency, which we'll also talk about here in a second, meditation, which meditation and is connected to the chronic stress, reducing chronic stress. Lots of research out there with that too, and its impact on telomere length, impact on minimizing chronic stress, impact on being able to focus, impact on overall happiness and healthy lifestyle. So definitely recommend checking out some meditation. Exercise, as we know, exercise is a topic in and of itself, and it's important on infinite levels. So with all this talk about inflammation and oxidative stress and how we can basically hurt ourselves and how we minimize our telomeres and all this stuff, how do we limit inflammation? How do we make sure that we're keeping all of these things, minimizing the good things and minimizing the bad things, and increasing the good things? And before I speak specifically about that, I want to, because I think it's necessary, I want to discuss a man named Bruce Ames. And I learned about Bruce Ames because he was the mentor for Rhonda Patrick, who I spoke about at the beginning. And he is a professor of biochemistry and molecular biology out at the University of California in Berkeley. Super smart, super cool guy. And currently he is 89 years old, so he's getting up there. But what I think is one of the coolest things about him is he's one of, across all genres of science, across all fields, he's one of the most cited scientists of all time. So his work has been cited a lot. So he's a VIP. He's famous in the world of science. So why he's important in this discussion is because he came up with an idea, a topic, a theory, I guess you can call it, called the triage theory. And what that is, it's the idea that the body has developed a rationing response to shortages of micronutrients, vitamins and minerals. When cells run out of a vitamin or mineral, that scarce micronutrient is allotted to the parts of the body that are essential for short-term survival. So these substances that are needed for long-term health, including those that protect your DNA, which we kind of talked about that a little bit, how important it is to protect your DNA, they can lose out and they can become disabled and lead to those diseases of aging, which we've also kind of talked about. So his triage theory, he decided to examine vitamin K, he and his researchers. And we'll talk about vitamin K here in a minute, but what they found was very frightening. When the supply of vitamin K was limited in the body, as it is in the typical American diet, we'll talk about that, but I want to say it's something along the lines of like 65% of Americans are deficient in vitamin K, and that's scary because the body utilizes what little it can to find critical metabolic functions in the liver, or to protect critical metabolic functions in the liver. So unfortunately, that leaves other vitamin K dependent parts of the body, the ones that are associated with bone building, keeping bones strong, the ones that are associated with cancer prevention and protecting the heart, without sufficient vitamin K to function properly. So basically what happens is the result leaves the body at risk for developing age-related diseases like the cancer, the heart disease, and osteoporosis. So basically what happens is if you're taking in minimal amounts of these micronutrients, vitamin K specifically, your body wants to survive short term, so it wants to survive the next 5 minutes, basically, and it does everything that it needs to do to survive 5 minutes at the cost of surviving for a year or 2 years or 3 years. So it pulls all of this stuff that it needs to have right now from all of the other processes, all the other tissues in the body, so it can survive right now. And as we kind of talked about, if you change up those cells, those tissues, those organs, over time, that can mutate those cells and that can cause that chronic disease, like we kind of mentioned there. And the idea is, and I think there's more studies that are being done, but all of these micronutrients, the A's, the B's, the C's, the D's, magnesium, etc., the same idea kind of takes place. The body uses all of those to survive immediately at the cost of surviving long term. So with that, before we get into some of these specific vitamins and minerals that are pivotal and important to the body, I want to kind of talk about recommended daily allowances and then deficiency for a second, because I think it's kind of important, and I just learned this recently, but we can go out and we can buy supplements. I mean, every store nowadays has a supplement aisle. I think it's interesting because for the longest time, I wanted to buy 100% of my daily recommended value of whatever it is I was buying, multivitamin, vitamin A, whatever I was buying, because I figured, okay, that's all I need. But the interesting thing about recommended daily allowances, which is an estimation of how much of a nutrient you need per day, which obviously makes sense. The interesting thing is they give you a minimum amount that you need to have. But if you are deficient in that particular vitamin or mineral that you're taking, that minimum amount is just going to maintain your deficiency. It's the minimum amount that you need to have. So if you're in a deficient state in any type of vitamin or mineral, you need to take more than the recommended daily allowance so you can get out of that deficient state and get up into an adequate state. So we are preventing ourselves from depleting all of our tissues that need these certain vitamins and minerals from getting what they need. So kind of defending itself against the triage theory. So how do you figure out what you're deficient in and what you're not deficient in? Well, you can go to your doctor. You can ask your doctor to test you on all of these, vitamin, mineral levels, because you can find it all in blood tests, and you can find where you should be, the range that you should be in, the sweet spot that you should be in for all these vitamins and minerals. So if you are deficient in something, you should probably take more to get out of that deficiency. But if you're in the sweet spot, then you could probably back it down a little bit and take less of these things. So I wanted to share that before we start talking about vitamins and minerals. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about are fruits and vegetables and the components of fruits and vegetables, why they're important, et cetera. So first and foremost, I would recommend organic, and I only say that because we kind of know more so what we're getting, minimize what's on those, what's sprayed on those, how they're grown, et cetera. That's just my preference, and that's what I recommend, but everybody can do their own thing and make their own decision. So first one is vitamin K, because we talked about that with Bruce Ames and the triage theory. But vitamin K, its high levels are found in green leafy vegetables such as kale, spinach, turnip greens, collards, Swiss chard, mustard greens, parsley, romaine, green leaf lettuce. So basically, if it's green and leafy, it's probably got vitamin K in it. So 65% of the U.S. population has an adequate intake of vitamin K. Can you imagine that, 65%? I mean, we got 340, 360 million people in America. Over half of them are deficient in vitamin K. So it's pretty significant, especially since, what we said vitamin K is used for. There are two main biologically active forms of vitamin K. So we have K1 and K2. Mostly, I think mostly deficient in vitamin K, or more so deficient in vitamin K. We're deficient in both, but and both are required cofactors for proteins that serve three major functions. So a cofactor is it works together with something else to serve these purposes. So what vitamin K is mostly known for is coagulation, which is the clotting of blood and protein. So this function is what the RDA for vitamin K is based on. So that minimum amount of vitamin K is what you need just to make sure your blood clots if you get a cut or if you start bleeding. Vitamin K also prevents the calcification of the arteries and blood vessels by pulling calcium out of the bloodstream and bringing it to the bones. So, and it maintains bone homeostasis by enabling bones to get the calcium they need. So, vitamin K, very interesting vitamin. I'd certainly recommend you look into that as well. Vitamin D, probably my favorite vitamin. Super interesting. It's so powerful. It's basically a steroid hormone, which, again, it's fantastic. It has a lot of uses. Going to try to touch on a couple of them here. I'm running out of time, but it is fat soluble, and a fat soluble vitamin is something that basically needs fat or oils of some sort to be absorbed into the body. And a fat soluble vitamin, it can be absorbed into fatty tissue. So if you are a little bit more overweight, you might need more vitamin D more intake of vitamin D to absorb the amount that you need. But that's just kind of here nor there type of idea. But nevertheless, it makes sense. But it also contributes to the fact that it is possible to overdose on vitamin D. I think it's probably pretty difficult because there are only a few sources diet-wise where you can get vitamin D from. So unless you're popping a boatload of high-dose vitamin D, you're probably not going to overdose, but nevertheless, it is possible. What does it do? Well, first off, we know it's a steroid hormone, but it controls the expression of over 1,000 genes. And what are genes? Basically, they're parts of our body that make up physiological processes, tell the body what to do, so to speak. So that's over 1/24 of the human genome, which is super interesting. So it controls basically 1,000 different things. It's part of what controls 1,000 different things that the body does. So in order for the body to do 1,000 different things, it needs vitamin D to do it. So it's very important and it's super interesting. One of those genes that it contributes to the usefulness of is something called NRF2. And NRF2 regulates the antioxidant activity that we spoke about. So, we're going to speak a little bit more to the antioxidant activity when we're talking about some fruit here in a second. But nevertheless, so we need to have some of that vitamin D to help with the antioxidants to get rid of that oxidative stress. Genes, I think we know what genes are. They're a unit of heredity. It's transferred from parent to offspring, and it determines our characteristics. Like I said, it kind of determines the physiological processes of our body. 70% of the U.S. population is deficient in vitamin D. 70%. So 7 out of 10 people aren't getting enough vitamin D. And that's not good because the absence of vitamin D it's associated with increased inflammation, associated with increased cancer risk due to the increased inflammation, increased DNA damage and acceleration of telomere shortening, which we spoke about, which can be associated with accelerated biological aging. So again, making sure we're getting enough vitamin D can really help those bodily processes, really help keep us strong and healthy. The interesting thing about this is because it is the sun vitamin, as we all know, we get the vitamin D from the sun. The latitude 37, so anybody above latitude 37 that kind of, dissects or bisects, what do you want to call it, the United States, anybody above that is probably deficient. Anybody below that gets enough sun where they shouldn't be deficient, but 2/3 of the U.S. is above that line. So it's really interesting. And again, look, that's one thing that I definitely recommend getting checked if you have low vitamin D, because it can work wonders as far as how you feel, happiness, energy, etc. Sweet spot for vitamin D is between 40 and 60 nanograms per milliliter. Thought I'd throw that in there in case you were wondering, in case you had any blood tests recently. What I do think is interesting is the daily recommended daily allowance of vitamin D is 600 IUs. IU is a unit of measurement for vitamin D, particularly for supplements. But what was found, studies have found, is 4,000 IUs per day of vitamin D3. There's 3 different kinds of vitamin D, by the way, 1, 2, and 3. But 4,000 IUs per day of vitamin D was enough to bring a majority of adults that were previously deficient up to just an adequate level of 30 nanograms per milliliter. So the sweet spot is 40 to 60, adequate is 30, and that took 4,000 IUs a day, which is 6.5 times that recommended daily allowance. So see, it's kind of what I was talking about with if you're in deficiency, you need, depending on what the vitamin is, what the substance is, you're probably going to need quite a bit to get you out of that deficient state. What are the sources of vitamin D? Well, sun is one of them. About 15 minutes is a good amount of time to spend out in the sun to get an adequate dose. Anything after that, obviously put on some sunscreen, and you don't want to get burned because that causes a whole new set of problems. But there is a fairly high amount in salmon, wild, fresh salmon, some in sardines, some in mackerel, cod oil, mushrooms, which I think is interesting. Some foods are fortified with small amounts of vitamin D, but you're going to have to consume a extraordinary amount to get anything really. Some of those things that are fortified are things like milk, orange juice, cereals, yogurts, etc. A couple of studies here I want to share with you. A study of 2,100 female twin pairs found that increased vitamin D levels correlated with increased telomere length in the white blood cells. So we talked about telomeres. Here's a real kicker, though. The difference in telomere length between those with high vitamin D and low vitamin D corresponded to 5 years of aging. So that if you are sufficient in vitamin D levels compared to deficient in vitamin D levels, over time, that can contribute to 5 years of biological aging. So you can be 5 years younger if you're sufficient in vitamin D, which I think is awesome and amazing. So again, that's vitamin D. Another study found, published, it was concluded that both males and females found that higher plasma vitamin D was significantly associated with longer telomere lengths in those white blood cells. So again, longer telomeres means staying younger. Good stuff. Staying younger, staying healthy. So the next thing I want to talk about is something called flavonoids. Flavonoids are fantastic. They are compounds that are produced by plants, specifically fruits. They are in vegetables as well, but apples and blueberries are huge sources of flavonoids. Flavonoids are awesome because they activate. Well, first off, they can bind to free radicals that we spoke about, right? So you have all these free radicals that are floating around your body. If you do, you can eat fruit, eat a high dosage of fruit, and they can go through blueberries. They can go through and they can bind to those free oxygen radicals, which, in essence, for lack of a better way of putting it, they render those free radicals no longer dangerous. They activate detoxification enzymes and antioxidant enzymes in the body. So this is it's a general mechanism by which they lower inflammation and oxidation in the body, including in the brain. So again, fruit, flavonoids, bind to free oxygen radicals, minimize inflammation, minimize oxidative stress, get healthy, get happy. Good stuff. They can also, I think this is pretty interesting, they can bind to some heavy metals. So like our proximity to flint, I think is kind of interesting because not to say that, just eating fruit is going to solve those problems, but lead being the heavy metal that it is, fruit, flavonoids have that power to bind to those heavy metal ions and help rid the body of those heavy metal ions. So I think that's really interesting and really cool aspect of fruit. They can also help prevent the growth of new tumors, which I think, I'm not entirely sure how they do that. I need to get back to everybody on that one, but I read that and I thought it was interesting, so I wanted to share it with you. Another compound that I really wanted to talk about is sulforaphane. And sulforaphane, it's a topic in and of itself, but I wanted to mention it. Rhonda Patrick is huge on sulforaphane. She has tons of information out there on YouTube on her Found My Fitness website. So please make sure that you go check that out. But sulforaphane, it's a compound within the isothiocyanate group of organosulfur compounds. And that's a lot of big words, but basically isothiocyanate just means a chemical compound in plants, or it is just a chemical compound in plants. And if it's organosulfur, it just means it's organic and it contains sulfur. So an organic sulfur-containing chemical compound found in plants, specifically cruciferous vegetables such as broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, and cauliflower. But what's really interesting is the largest, source of sulforaphane is in broccoli sprouts. So you can grow them 3 or 4 day old broccoli sprouts, fairly cheap, throw them in a smoothie, and it's super healthy, super good. So I recommend that. And again, feel free to go and look up that stuff with Rhonda. It's a huge impact on inflammation, huge impact on minimizing chronic disease, huge impact on minimizing cancer risk and even the risk of cancer recurrence. So I think that's pretty awesome. But a lot of information out there on sulforaphane. Something interesting about that too is it becomes available after chewing. So like you have to damage the plant in order to get that sulforaphane to be active so you can absorb it and get the benefits from it. So I think that's kind of an interesting tidbit about sulforaphane. Let's talk about magnesium for a second. I think everybody's heard of magnesium, and basically if you're eating plants, green plants, you're probably getting some magnesium because magnesium is at the center of the chlorophyll molecule, which chlorophyll is what makes green plants green. 45% of the U.S. does not meet the recommended daily allowance of just 350 to 400 milligrams of magnesium per day. And again, because we don't eat a whole lot of vegetables in this day and age in America, unfortunately. They're not as readily available as a lot of other options, a lot of other foods, the empty calorie type foods. Magnesium is huge. Magnesium is super, super healthy, super impactful in the body. Over 300 different enzymes in the body require magnesium, including all the enzymes that use and produce ATP. And ATP is the energetic currency in the cell. So basically ATP is energy. And that's the basis of energy for the most part. That ATP is bound to a magnesium ion in order to be biologically active. So these functions of magnesium are required for short-term survival. So again, it's one of those things where the body is pulling all the magnesium it needs, if it's deficient, from everywhere else to make that ATP. So if you can't make ATP, you simply can't live, because obviously with no energy, I guess you can't live. You're not going to live. So any magnesium in the body, again, is going to go to maintain that energy production. So we need to make sure that we're getting enough magnesium. We're getting enough of those green leafy vegetables, green leafy plants, green plants in general. Anything green. If it's green and it's edible, eat it. I recommend it. This is also, I think, super interesting and super crucial to know is that DNA repair enzymes require magnesium as well. So again, keeping that DNA healthy, because again, that mutated DNA, those mutated chromosomes, mutated cells lead to chronic disease, lead to cancer. So again, magnesium, you can get it supplement form. If you're eating those green plants, you'll get a nice heavy dose. So once again, it's that triage theory idea we were talking about, where your body's going to pull magnesium from all the other bodily processes and tissues to make sure that it's making that ATP, making that energy, so you can continue to live on an immediate basis in the near future as opposed to long term. So making sure we have enough is very important. Now I want to talk a little bit about, I don't have too much time here, but I want to talk a little bit about omega-3 fatty acids. And omega-3 fatty acids, as we know, mostly associated with fish, those fatty fish, cold water fish, salmon, which is delicious. I certainly enjoy salmon. But the essential fatty acid that must be provided in the diet because it cannot be made within the body. So in 2002, the U.S. Institute of Medicine established a daily adequate intake of omega-3 fatty acid between 1.1 grams for women and 1.6 grams for men. Granted, a lot of people since then, a lot of sources since then, a lot of experts since then think that it should be exponentially more, and we'll kind of get into that here in a second. But there are a handful of different types of omega-3. We have DHA, EPA, and ALA. I can't pronounce the actual words for DHA, so we're just going to keep it at DHA. But again, it is in fatty fish, salmon. DHA and EPA are in salmon. But it's interesting because those omega-3s, they come from the microalgae, such as zooplankton and phytoplankton, that the fish eat when they're in the ocean. So if you wanted to, you could get supplements of fish oil, omega-3 fish oil, or you could get those omega-3 supplements via microalgae supplements, which is kind of interesting, but nevertheless, both of them have that EPA and DHA in there. DHA supplementation inhibits the conversion of certain fatty acids to inflammatory compounds, thus reducing inflammation as measured by decreased levels of C-reactive protein, which we kind of talked about, that biomarker of inflammation. And then IL-6, which is just another, again, biomarker of inflammation. So it's, again, the whole goal, the whole idea here is to minimize inflammation and oxidative stress as much as possible. So we have the DHA, we have the EPA, and then we have something called ALA. And again, the DHA and EPA come from those fatty fish and the microalgae, and the ALA comes from things like flax seeds and walnuts and soybeans. But it's interesting because the ALA, the more powerful omega-3s are the DHA and EPA, because the ALA needs to convert to DHA and EPA, and only do that on like a 5% conversion rate. So it's a very low conversion rate, but nevertheless, still eat it, still healthy, still a good approach. there's a lot out there about omega-3s. Again, I certainly recommend you going and checking out Follow My Fitness website. She has a lot of information on there related to omega-3s. One thing I wanted to mention about omega-3 as well is it's the most abundant fatty acid in the brain. So again, the levels of DHA are exceedingly high during development and decrease with age. So if we can make sure that we're maintaining our high levels of intake of omega-3, then we can hopefully help minimize or help keep our brain healthy, thinking straight, minimize our risk of dementia and Parkinson's and diseases of the brain. So I think it's really interesting. And again, it comes from, we can supplement with it. We can just eat fatty, cold water, wild fish, and get a pretty significant dose. There are a lot of studies out there that relate to or show positive benefits of omega-3. And some of those, they promote weight loss. It shows the prevention of type 2 diabetes by reducing TNF-alpha levels. And I don't know if we talked about TNF-alpha or not yet, but TNF-alpha is it's a pro-inflammatory cytokine that we spoke about a little bit ago. We mentioned pro-inflammatory cytokines. So that's what TNF-alpha is. It's one of those pro-inflammatory cytokines, and it induces insulin resistance, which obviously is a hallmark of type 2 diabetes. So omega-3 fatty acids can help prevent diabetes, can help promote weight loss. It can help promote muscle mass. So it's kind of interesting because omega-3s, they help they help as far as your body's utilization of insulin. So insulin it can be a powerful muscle gainer. I know that in the illegal world of performance enhancing drugs, there are people who use insulin to help generate muscle mass because of its connection to increased muscle mass. So just by taking in those omega-3 fatty acids, DHA, EPA, ALA, we can help how our body reacts to insulin and reacts to glucose, and we can maintain that muscle mass, which is healthy because low muscle mass is associated with an increased mortality risk. So people who are very, frail, so to speak, low amounts of muscle mass have much higher rates of all-cause mortality. So something that just think about, do the best you can, getting that as much omega-3 as you possibly can. So I think my time is up. I want to remind everybody, if you'd like to reach out to me, if you'd like to talk to me, the email I have set up, again, is cultivatinghealthpodcast@gmail.com, and I'm still going to keep working on that Facebook page, try to make one of those if anybody wants to reach out to me. I have quite a bit more I'd like to talk about, so hopefully I can get back in here as soon as possible and keep talking. So thanks for listening.